I am so pleased, and Katie, is this the second or the third time? I don't remember, but to have Krishna Das as our guest today, and we were just chatting, and I said to him that with we in our meetings like this weekly, you know we often look at very serious topics and really heart-wrenching topics. That is our practice at Zen Peacemakers to look and not turn away from the suffering of the world. So having KD here is a little bit like dessert. It's a nice gentle reprieve from that. And I'm gonna hand this to him in just a second. But I did want to point out, and I'm going to admit that this was a complete accident. When I got dressed this morning, and I haven't done this for months, I put on a red plaid shirt. and, then I realized I had done that. And I just wanted to say that mimicry is the most sincere form of flattery. So
Okay.
I hope you'll take it as such. So
No problem.
so let's go ahead and start. And Katie, I'm going to hand it to you, and we can find our way through this. You may want to let folks know what technically the challenge we had, but
Yeah,
I'll take it away.
let me first greet you all and say hi. And I want to apologize. I tried to, my setup for the sound and the harmonium and everything was on the other side of the room, but the computer over there wouldn't join Zoom. So, and we didn't find that out until about a minute and a half ago. So I dragged myself back over here to this computer, and but I can still sing a little bit with my old trusty Hectara here if it comes to that. So, anyhow, very good. Good to see you. Here we are. Good. Geoff, you better give me some direction here.
I will. I
Uh,
will.
I'm brain
Uh,
dead.
yeah, and I'm looking forward to hearing you sing, and that will be wonderful. I do have a prompt question, and this kind of gives away. And I really don't try to live in the past so much, but it was so seminal for me, and I'd be interested if you're inclined to have you talk a little bit about 1969 Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. I'm sorry, Zen. The Three Pillars of Zen came out in 1969. The next year, Zen Mind,
Ah,
Beginner's Mind came out in 1970, and then 71, Be Here Now came out. And for me, as a young person, those rocked my world. I'm not alone. I know so many contemporaries who were affected by those three books. But the third one in particular, you have intimate knowledge of, and the books around that book and so forth. And I'd love it just to hear you chat a little bit about that and share some history.
yeah, yeah. Well, at one point after Ramdas first came back from India, his first time there, while he was in India, he got his teacher, his yoga teacher, came to see him and said that Maharajji had sent blessings for his book. So Ramdas at this point was sitting, freezing his ass off in a temple in the mountains in the Himalayas, uh, and had no idea what Maharajji was talking about a book. But when he came back to America, he started thinking about it. So he wrote a book about this and that, and everything, and it was rejected at every publisher he took it to. So he gave up the idea finally. And then uh, he was in the local town. He'd been like hiding out at his father's place, just staying alone in up in New Hampshire. And he went to town to get something. And as he was walking down the street, these hippies came up to him and asked him if he had any dope to sell, you know. And he looked at them, and this is where it all came from. He said to them, "I'm not that kind of connection." And that was the beginning of all the nonsense that followed. At that point, people started coming to see him up at the farm at his father's place, and he started talking to people, and then he started giving lectures, and the lectures were recorded. And then a woman who was kind of in the group was a court stenographer. She went through the tapes and typed them all out and gave them to Ram Dass. He had a stack of papers about, 2 feet deep. He threw them in the trunk of his car, and he was driving around with these papers in his car. And he went to visit a friend of his out in California who said, "What's that?" He said, "Oh, it's transcriptions of all these talks I've given." So the guy took them and he started to say, "Wow, this is really great. This could be really a great book." And they bounced around the states, and finally, and then up at the Lama Foundation, Steve Durkee, who was up there running the foundation with this group of people, and Ram Dass spent the winter up there, and they made they read the book, and they made all that artwork for the big box, which was the first version of the book. And so I was in India when Ram Dass came back the second time. I was with Maharajji, and he brought a copy of Be Here Now, the book. And Maharajji took it, and the next day he comes out and he says to Ram Dass, he says, "Ram Dass, there's lies in this book. You have to change them." And Ram Dass said, "What lies? What?" And it turned out that Ram Dass, one of Maharajji's former disciples who kind of went off on his own, had told Ram Dass a bunch of stories about his history, that he'd lived in the jungle since he's a boy, etc. And when in fact he worked for the forest department and stuff like that. So Maharajji said, "Ram Dass, you have to change him." So Ram Dass went back to town. And in those days, in order to call back to the States, you had to call the local operator, who called the town operator, who called the county operator, who called the federal operator, who called the international operator, who booked the call. And then you waited like 10 or 12 hours, and it came back through that line. So finally, Ram Dass got Steve Durkee on the phone, and he said, we have to change some of the text in the book. And Steve said, "It's impossible. I just came back from dropping off the what do you call it, the proofs for the book, and the guy's going to start printing it. He's probably already started printing it." So Ram Dass came back to the temple the next day, and he says to Maharajji, "It's too late. We'll change it on the next printing." And Maharajji says, "Nay, truth is more important than money. You have to change it now." So Ram Dass went back to town and booked another call. And he gets Steve on the phone, and Steve said to him, "You'll never believe this. I called the publisher, the printer, and just as he was about to start printing, the front plate of the book, which was a picture of Maharajji, fell and broke. So nothing was printed. And so they corrected the text, and then it was printed. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful.
Little things like that were happening all the time. So yeah, Be Here Now was really wonderful. Really wonderful. And it's incredible how many people around the world were touched by that book, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
There's a picture of my cat in the book somewhere.
Well, Katie, I was going to say, you probably have one of these. I have like a pre-production unbound.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's from the box. Yeah, because originally
Yeah.
the book was a box that they mailed to people for $3.33, I think it was, something like that.
Yeah, yeah. I'm, in my will, I'm going to tell my kids, don't worry about the house, don't worry about the car, but make sure somebody ends up with that book. So.
Or either that or sell in and buy a real house. By
you
then
go.
it'll be worth a fortune.
Are you of a mind to sing a bit here? Just to
I
break.
am, except things are falling off the shelves here. It's crazy. What is going on?
It's
Sure.
entropy.
Like I said, I can't sing with my harmonium because all that's over there, but I have my trusty two-string, one-string instrument here.
Oh,
I might
wonderful.
try to do something. I don't know if it'll work.
I'll mute myself. I'll mute myself so we don't loop back here.
I wish I could mute myself. See if I take this out. Can you hear the harp? Can you hear the Nectar? Give me a thumbs up if you can hear it. Yeah? Okay. Thank you. Sarvashyarti Hare Devi Narayani Namostute Siddhi Buddhi Prade Devi Bhakti Mukti Pradayani Murte Mahadevi Mahalakshmi Namostute. Jaya Jagadanbe Sita
Wonderful. Thank you, PD. Can you tell us about that chant, about those the lyric,
Yeah,
or
those are the mantras that got me into trouble. Uh, those were mantras to the goddess in India known as Durga, who has three different aspects: Mahakali, Mahalakshmi, and Mahasaraswati. Each each manifestation is to purify the different gunas, the sattva guna, the raja guna, and the tama guna, the inertia, too much craziness, and even too much purity, attachment to purity, and quietness, silence. So the different forms. So I was always attracted to the goddess, and I just started singing these mantras, and at one point, Maharajji, Neem Karoli Baba, he built a new temple in the courtyard while I was living in the temple. I don't know why this is happening. Give me 1 second. Let me do this. Do not disturb. Anyhow, so I was living in the temple, and he built a new temple across the courtyard to Durga, the goddess Durga. And they brought in a Pujari, a priest, to do the worship. But after a few days, they caught him stealing the money out of the donation box in front of the temple. So they sent him home and brought in a second Pujari, and they caught him stealing the money after a few days. They brought in a third one, and sure enough, they caught him stealing the money. So the temple trust, it was a government-owned temple. Maharajji, built it and lived there, but the government theoretically owned it. So the temple trust, the guys that ran the temple, they came to Maharajji and said, Baba, we can't find a priest that won't steal. What are we going to do? Maharajji goes, my priest won't steal. Your priest? Who's your priest? Yeah, Krishna Das, he said. So I was summoned from the back of the temple where the Westerners spent most of their time, banished to inner darkness. And I was asked to sit out in front of this temple and distribute the prasad, what they call the charan amrit, which means the nectar from the feet of the deity. And mostly it's water or a mixture of milk and water. So all day long I sat out there and distributed to people, and it was fun because a lot of people didn't like taking it from a Westerner, but they had to because I was Maharajji's Pujari, so they had to take it. So he was running a trip on them too, and so that was a very big thing for me. And many years later, Siddhima, who was Maharajji's great disciple, she told me that when Maharajji made me the Pujari of the Durga temple in 1972, he created this whole thing that I do now, going around and chanting with people. And she said, you're still distributing the Charanamrit.
Beautiful.
In the form of the name. The name. In India, and in Eastern practices, repetition of mantra or name is very important. And so it's a very big practice. So she said, this is what you're doing. But he created it all in 1972. I don't remember him asking me if I wanted to do this or anything. I don't remember signing any contract but he just, a siddha. Maharajji was not just a saint. He was a siddha. And in fact, the 16th Karmapa, here's an interesting story. So, smallpox used to be a really big problem in India and Africa. And Maharajji, there was one of a Westerner there named Dr. Larry Brilliant, who was with us. And Maharaji, if you want to read an incredible book, it's called Sometimes Brilliant. And it's an amazing book. And it's the story of how Maharaji sent Larry 10 times back to Delhi in order to try to get a job working for the United Nations Health Organization to eradicate smallpox. And it's a miraculous story. And Larry's a great storyteller. You might have seen him on CNN during the
Yes.
pandemic
Yeah.
because he's one of the leading epidemiologists in the world. So, so Larry and his wife Girija, after going around India one time and inoculating everyone, sometimes they get to, in India, many villagers, they worship Kali, and they worship a particular form of Kali called Shitali Devi. That is smallpox. Kali is the goddess of that manifests destruction and absorbing all the darkness. And one of her forms is smallpox.
Mm.
And so they get to these villages and they'd say, okay, we've come to inoculate you. And they say, no way. We worship the deity in that form. So what they would do is they would leave and they would come back at night and they would break into the headman of the village's house or hut, hold him down and inoculate him against smallpox. And then he would go, okay, now it must be the will of the goddess. Everybody gets inoculated now. And so that's how they went around. They went around India, village by village, town by town. It was amazing. It was a crew of many people doing this. So they got to Sikkim, and they went to see the 16th Karmapa. Everybody knows it was one of the greatest yogis, saints that ever lived. And they told him what they were doing, and he said, "Oh, no problem. The king is my disciple, and he'll give you permission to go wherever you want," because they had to check the villages. And then he asked Larry and Girija, his wife, what's your Dharma? What practice do you do? And we never knew what to say because our practice was sitting around staring at Maharaji. That's all we did. That was the only thing. We didn't know anything else. In fact, Maharaji used to say, these Westerners, they're only qualified for the 5-limbed yoga, not the 8-limbed yoga. Ashtanga yoga is 8-limbed.
Right.
They're only qualified for 5-limbed yoga, which is gup, gumne, kane, pine, and sone, which means gossiping, wandering around, drinking tea, sleeping, and gup, gumne, kane, and eating. Those are the 5-limbed yoga we were qualified for. So anyhow, what Larry did, he took a picture of Maharaji and he handed it to His Holiness, and His Holiness said, "Oh, Bodhisattva." And he pointed to the picture and said, "Bodhisattva, the teachings of all bodhisattvas are the same, even if they appear different. Bodhisattva," he said, "Chenrezi Bodhisattva," and he points to Maharaji, Bodhisattva. And then he pointed to his altar and he said, "You see those statues? Those are the Mahasiddhas." And Mahasiddhas, and he points to Maharaji, he said, "Mahasiddha." Whoa. So, yeah, it was quite extraordinary. So then, so Larry and Girija went and they checked all the villages, and it's an amazing story. You really, it's an incredible read, sometimes brilliant.
Thank you. And by the way, I have it in my
You have it? Oh, great, yeah.
in my
Larry,
read queue. So on your recommendation, I might move it up in the queue
bump
a
it
little
up
bit.
a little, bump it up.
Thank you. You said that chant was the one that got you into trouble. I gather that was somewhat tongue in cheek, of course.
Yeah, kind of, in other words, it saved my life.
Is there one that got you out of trouble?
Well, those were chants to the goddess, and I never sang them to Maharaji, but he knew, of course. And so when he made me the Pujari of the temple, it was he was aligning me with my karmic predilections, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
your nature. Your
Yeah.
nature. Yeah.
I don't even know what
Um,
we were talking about, but keep going.
well, we're good. We're good. I would be remiss, and you've uh, did you take yourself off spotlight?
I did.
Oh,
Should
good.
I be
Okay.
on Spotlight
Oh,
again? I
it's
wanted to
well,
see.
when you're talking, I'll put you back on. It's okay this way. Um,
Okay.
but you've given Zen Peacemakers such a beautiful gift in the music, calling out to hungry hearts,
Right. Yeah.
and we repeat that often, and it's just it's just such a moving piece of music and lyric. And so I'd love to have you, if that's something you can do ad lib without your harmonium.
I
Uh,
can do it. I can. I'm sure everybody knows the story of how that happened.
Perhaps let's
No,
assume they
people
don't.
people are saying, okay.
I think we have nearly. By the way, Katie, I'm going to tell you, we have. You probably can see we have 100 people here today. I think you have more people here today than Nikki Haley had in her last in her in her last rally.
That's
So
because nobody. You don't have to vote for me. That's why. You just have to show up.
I would vote for you. So yeah,
I'm not
I
running
think
for shit. I'm just running away.
running on empty. Telling the story of you and Bernie and how that came to be would be wonderful. I think a lot of people would appreciate that.
Yeah. Bernie. I had seen his picture in like Tricycle, the uh, advertising homeless retreats and stuff like that. And I said, this guy's crazy. This guy's scary. I don't want anything to do with this guy. I got you know. And then I arrived at the Bahamas, at the Shivananda Ashram in the Bahamas on the eve of the millennium, 1999. And who was there? Bernie. And I went, oh shit. Oh God, this is, well, okay, I guess I'll have to meet him, right? So I walk into the place and I don't even have a chance to unpack. He comes rushing up to me and he comes up and he grabs me and he gives me a big hug. And he says, looks up at me and says, after my wife died, I listened to you 24 hours a day for 2 years. Every time I was working on my computer and working, all I did was listen to Om Namah Shivaya. I said, you can't do that. You're a Zen master. And he looked at me, I'm a Zen master, so I can do what I want. So that was the beginning of, I just totally fell in love with him. And I don't know, he was always so sweet to me. We had a wonderful. So one time I don't know where I was, somewhere, and I get an email with 8 lines of a prayer on it. And at the bottom it said, can you do something with this? So I wrote back like what? There's a lot of options. So he said, well, we Buddhists are not so good with melody. He said, maybe you could come up with a good melody and then we could sing this at the Zen Peacemakers gatherings. So I said, well, when's the next gathering? He said, 11 months. I said, okay, good. I'll work on it. So I carried those 8 lines around the world with me a couple of times. I'd look at them, they'd look at me, I'd look at them, they'd look at me. Nothing was happening. So I wrote to Bernie, I said, Bernie, is it okay if I mess with the words a little? So I got a 1-word email back, mess. Okay. So I kind of rearranged the words a little bit, and then a melody showed up, which was nice, and it was a nice melody. So I thought, okay. So I wrote to Bernie, I said, now I have a melody. I have a melody for it. And he said, oh, good, now you can start working on the rest of the prayer. And I said, how long is that? And he said, 30 pages. And I wrote, Bernie, it's going to take 3 lifetimes. I got a 1-word email back, 2. So yeah, that's how that happened. And but the funny thing is, so the original prayer, the last line of the prayer says, all of your sorrows, I make it mine. That's what the prayer says. It's part of the I think it's pronounced Konronmon, the gates of sweet nectar.
Yeah, the gate of sweet nectar. Yes.
Yeah, and the last line of that part of the prayer is, all of your sorrow I make it mine. So when we arrived at the in Yonkers for the next meeting of the Zen Peacemakers, I showed him the words, and he said, "Now wait a minute. I don't want just I don't just want your sorrow. I want your joy too. You have to change it." So that's why it says, what does it say? Your joy and your sorrow, I
Yes,
make it mine. Something
yes,
like that, yeah.
yeah,
So yeah, that's because it's Bernie. He didn't want to just suffer. He wanted to have a good time too,
yes.
while he was suffering.
Yeah, the third uh or the second line of the Zen Peacemaker vows, I vow to bear witness to encounter each creation with respect and dignity, and to be touched by both the joys and the pain of the universe. So
Yeah,
it really is foundational, isn't it, for
yeah,
what Bernie taught and what it is that we do today. That it's
yeah,
both of those. It's both of those.
yeah. Singing at Jesus' shrine, where her ashes were buried in Auschwitz. That was really powerful.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I can sing. I don't know. Let me see. Maybe I can sing it, maybe I can't, but I can chant it. Let's see how it goes. Calling out to hungry hearts everywhere through endless time. You who wander, you who thirst, I offer you this body mind. Calling out to hungry spirits everywhere through endless time. Calling out to hungry hearts, all the lost and the left behind. Gather round and share this meal, your joy and your sorrow, I make it mine. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, KD. What happens to you when you sing that?
Well, I feel Bernie. That's one thing. But as big as the sky. Yeah. It opens up that connection with all beings. To remind us of that connection is very important, to be reminded again and again. Because most of us, myself included, live as if our individual daily situation is the most important thing in the universe. So it's always good to be reminded that it might not be.
Yeah. We never fully resolve that tendency to be greedy and angry and selfish. Small,
Yeah,
constant practice.
yeah,
Maybe let's at this point give you a bit of a break And I don't want to open completely for questions. Uh, but again, we've got a wonderful group of folks here, and I can't see everybody. I'm going to go back to gallery here. I can see about a quarter of you. So let's take questions from maybe a couple of people, just to break things up a little bit. Maybe we'll do this another time or two. And if you would please use your electronic hand in Zoom, it's down under reactions. I'm sure many of you we're all becoming Zoom experts these last few years, but down under reactions, you'll see raise hand. And if you click that, you'll go to the top left of my screen, and then I'll call on you. And if you have a question or a comment for KD, we can take a couple of these, and then we'll go back. Someone just chatted me. Will you receive a recording? You won't receive one, but there will be one posted on the Zen Peacemakers website, and it'll take a couple of days, but it will be up there. And Susie, I see your hand. Thank you so much. Go ahead.
Hi, good morning, everyone, and good morning, KD. That last line of Bernie's song talks about making other people's suffering ours. There was a story that I recall about Maharajji, who took on some of the suffering I think that you had as regard to an illness in one of the towns in India. Can you tell us that story?
Well, it's believed that these really great saints can actually absorb your negative karmas and work it out on their own bodies. That Maharajji's intimate disciples, the one who like were in the room with him and helped dress him and everything, they used to say that he had sores appear and disappear on his body all the time, Well, all kinds of things were happening. He couldn't walk, his knees would swell up and then they would go away, everything. And it was always, not always, but many times they could connect it to someone that he was connected to who was going through some illness or something like that. Miracles would just fall off of him, it was extraordinary. Yeah. People who were sick would be healed. In India they go to saints for everything. You need a job, you go to a saint. You don't have a kid, you go to a saint. You're sick, you go to a saint. And you ask for help, and many times the saints can really help you. With me, there was something that I was going through that he precipitated. He very directly pushed me, was pushing me and brought this stuff out of me. It's not. I'll tell a very short version of the story. Before I went to India, at one point I had a girlfriend who we broke up, and it was a very messy, emotional breakup, and I had kind of like a nervous breakdown, and I was sitting in my room, and in the floor in front of me, in slow motion, there was smoky, gray, black whirlpool kind of opened up in the floor in front of me, and it was turning, and I was being pulled down into it, and I pulled myself out, and I went over to my friend's room, and I stood outside his door like this, and he was like my first guru, my first friend, my first teacher, this guy. He turned me on. Actually, he gave me the book. I still have an old copy of Zen and Japanese Culture. from 1970. Anyhow, so I stood there outside of his door, like, and he was reading a book. He didn't even look up at me, but he knew what I was going through. He just said, after about a few minutes of letting me stand there, he said, "You're not going to get any pity out of me, you know." And bang, oh, and the whole thing was gone. So now, fast forward a couple of years, maybe 3 years, 4 years. I'm in India. I'm up in the mountains. I've been alone for up in the mountains. All the other Westerners were somewhere else, and I went out to do a retreat in a little hut in the mountains that was owned by a friend of ours. And I planned to stay there a few weeks. I had rice and vegetables and a pot to cook in and everything. I probably would have starved to death. But anyhow, the first night I was there, I woke up in the middle of the night, sweating, freezing, sweating, freezing, sweating, freezing. And as dawn came, I could not even pick up my arms. I was completely destroyed. It turned out that I had a really bad case of hepatitis. But of course, at that point, I didn't know what it was. But I did know that no one was coming to see me out at the hut for weeks. And I was going to die because I could barely move. So I dragged myself out of the hut and I rolled myself down the mountain, throwing one shoulder over the other as I rolled down the mountain into the road. And I laid in the road all day. Cars were going back and forth. Finally, I thought, well, it's March. It's about 8,000 feet. When the sun goes down, it's going to get cold and I'm going to die. I'll freeze to death. So I rolled myself out into the middle of the road, figuring it'll be faster if I just get run over by a car, but maybe they'll stop. So sure enough, I hear this. It's on a slope, and I'm lying down looking down the slope, like this on the road, and I feel the vibration of this big truck or bus coming up the hill. And sure enough, a big blue government roadways bus comes around the bend in the road and comes right towards me. And I'm just looking at it. Okay, what's going to happen now? Well, it stopped about 10 feet from my head. And everybody gets off the bus. They picked me up and carried me on the bus, put me on the floor. They took me to the town, and then a Nepali coolie carried me on his back up to my friend's house, threw me in the bed, and that's where I was for about 2 months. So at one point, while I was beginning to recover, I got a letter from a mutual friend of mine and my ex-girlfriend's. And the letter said that Gail had been living on a commune in Vancouver, and her mother came to see her and took her back to New York and put her into a mental hospital. And on Long Island, as if Long Island itself is not a mental hospital. However, she put him into a mental hospital. And so our friend went to see her, and she wrote to me. She said she was completely gone for hours. But at one point she opened her eyes and looked at this woman, and asked about me. And then her eyes closed again and she was gone. So this woman, Mitty, wrote to me. So I'm lying there in my bed where I've been for months with this hepatitis, and I'm just thinking, well, maybe I should go back. Maybe I could help her. My mind started revolving around her. About a week later, I got a second letter, and it said that she had escaped from the hospital and killed herself. And I realized, because of the amount of time that it took mail to get in those days from the States to where I was, that when I got the first letter, she was already dead. And this was like a shock. My whole body was like hit by a truck. And I said, okay, well, when Maharaji comes back to the hills and to his temple in the hills, I'll go see him and I'll ask for blessings for her. So about a month went by, and he comes back, and the other Westerners started to show up, and we all started going to the temple every day, and I forgot about Gail. So one night, she came to see me, and she was not happy. She was not happy. Her eyes were like this, and she had fangs, and she was like, we were walking down the street in front of my mother's house, and she was saying, why didn't you help me? Why didn't you do something for me? But in the dream, I was cool, or in the experience, I was cool, and I was talking to her. It was like talking somebody down from a bad acid trip, and she started to soften. Her eyes started to soften. But as we passed my mother's house in the street, I turned and went into the house and closed the door. And when I heard the door close, I woke up and I was sweating. I was completely freaked. So I ran to the temple. First thing in the morning, I ran to the temple and I dragged Dada in, one of Maharaji's great disciples, who was a great translator. And we go into Maharaji's room, and I'm sitting there, the three of us, and I'm telling Dada the whole story, right? As I'm telling Dada the story, and Maharaji supposedly doesn't understand English, right? So I'm telling Dada the whole story. As I'm telling him the story, Maharaji's going over and over, 2 days before, just repeating, 2 days before, 2 days before. The minute I stopped telling Dada the story, Maharaji looks at me and he said, 2 days before she died, she thought of you. That's why this has come back to you. Then he bops me on the head and said, don't worry, she won't bother you anymore. And I said, Baba, what about her? Will she have a good birth next time? And then he said, yes, she'll have a good birth. That's the only time I ever heard him talk about rebirth. He never talked about that stuff. He talked about what's going on in the family, are the kids nice to the parents, who's doing this, who's doing what. You know, he was like a grandfather in everybody's family. But he never talked about those kind of things often. So there he was. He said, she'll have a good birth. Then he looks at me and he said, why did you leave her? And I was about to go, what? You know, I didn't leave her. She left me. I was about to say that. And then my mind cleared. And I realized I'd been telling myself a story all those years. I had pulled back first. And then she went and met somebody else and the whole thing happened. But I had pulled away first. And I hadn't remembered that. But it was perfectly clear to him. Then he bops me on the head. Don't worry. You'll be happy when you're married. Now, you see, what happened is, with this Western group of Westerners, there was a lot of energy, a lot of joy, a lot of love. People would get together, right? You know, they get together and they come to the temple of Maharaji, go, oh, they're friends. They're friends. Isn't that nice? They're friends, right? A couple of days later, oh, they're good friends. A couple of days later, boom, you're married. Go see your parents. Go back to America. I was not going back to America under any condition. Never. That was my job, to stay as close to those feet as I could. I would, you know, so I would just be like this. Of course, in my mind, I was totally burning with lust, right? But I wouldn't act on it. I would just, you know, because I could see people got together, boom, you'd get, you know, you're back in America. No, not me. However, after this, he started teasing me. Oh my God, it was horrible. Oh, Krishnadas cried when his wife died, but he'll be happy when he's married again. And I would just go, you know, you know, and he'd be looking at me, laughing. One day, this woman in the group comes up to me and she says, do you think if two people are supposed to be together, Maharaji would put them together? I said, yeah, sure. Then she says, so why don't you ask Maharaji to marry us? What? You know? So later in the day, we're sitting around with Maharaji, and I could speak a little Hindi, so sometimes he used to ask me to translate. So I was sitting there, And he points to the guy next to me. I said, him? Nay, nay, nay. And behind him there was another guy. Him? Nay, nay, nay. And I look, and there's that woman, right? Her? He says, yeah, her. Do you love her? Thank God I had a mind. I said, oh, yes, Baba. I love her so much as a sister. And he cracked up. Oh, Krishnadas is really clever. He laughed at it. But he started teasing me getting married. And I can't, I just started to get really freaky, really fragile. And one day, KK Shā's family, KK was our really great friend, and the family were very close. They came to the temple to do their yearly Guru Puja. So the Westerners rushed into Maharajji's room, and we knew that they brought a blanket for him, right? He wore a blanket. He always had a blanket on. And we knew sometimes if you brought a blanket for him, he would take off his blanket and give it away and put on the new blanket. And I saw that they had brought a blanket, and I knew he would take off his blanket. I wanted that blanket. I wanted that blanket. I wanted that blanket. I want that blanket. And I was standing there like in the back of the room like this, and I watched him take his blanket off, and he looked right at me, and he threw it to the guy standing next to me. And I heard a crack of thunder. I really did hear a crack of thunder, but it was my mind. And he looked at me immediately and said, go read the Gita. Somebody give him a copy of the Bhagavad Gita. Go sit in the room there and go read it. And I could barely stand. I was like, I exploded. Like that. So I take the book and I go back to the room and I sit down and I open up the Gita, and I'm reading, the soul is not born, it doesn't die, you can't cut it, you can't wet it, blah, blah, blah. And the book falls from my hands, and that whirlpool opens up in the floor in front of me again. And this time, it's over. I'm being pulled down into it. I have no vote. I have no will. I'm gone. And I'm just going down into it, down into it, down. And all of a sudden, somebody comes to the door and says, Krishnadas, what? Maharajji's calling. Okay. So I got up and I walked to the front of the temple. And by the time I got to him, I just fell in his lap and I was just weeping. Weeping. I couldn't stop. I was crying. And he let me cry. It was unusual. He just sat there quiet. And I just wept in his lap with my head in his lap. And then he started repeating what I was reading in the Gita. The soul is not born. The soul doesn't die. You can't cut it. You can't wet it. It's beyond this, beyond that. And then he banged me on the head. He said, don't worry. The hard times are gone. The good times will come now. And I said, Baba, what's wrong with me? All I do is think of myself. All I do is I'm so. And he goes, attachment. Attachment. It's all attachment. He said, samsara is the flow of attachment. One attachment replaces another, one after the other. No attachment, no world, no samsara. He said, someone dies and people cry and they don't eat, but after a few days they're laughing and drinking again. One attachment replaces another, one after the other. Then he hits me and said, you'll be happy when you're married. I said, Baba, I want to marry you. And he laughed. He said, if you marry me, all you'll get is love. You won't get laid. And he laughed. And because he knew what I really wanted, So it was too funny. So from
Wonderful.
that day on, he. So yeah.
Thank you.
This is what happened. Like around him, karmas would ripen and they would come up, and if that happened in a different situation, it would have been very dangerous. But because he was pulling all the strings and making sure that he was taking care of everything. He was bringing this stuff up so that it could go. He was ripening it in us and then removing it, letting it go. And yeah, and this happened with everybody in one way or another. All the people there.
Wonderful. Katie, we have a bit of a queue of people who want to ask a question. Let's take one more, and then I'm going to ask you to sing again. But and I want to be respectful of your pronunciation. Clemence, is this you? Am I close?
Hi.
Hi.
Hello. Oh,
Hi.
hey. How are you
Hi,
doing?
Katie. How are you?
Good. You babysitting?
No, I'm at the bakery.
Oh, very good.
My question is kind of related to everything you've just been talking about, and since you've had 50 years of practice, maybe you can share some wisdom. But
50 years of pretending to practice, yeah.
it's just about selfishness and thinking of yourself. And, you know, I feel like I'm on a spiritual path, and I'm definitely interested in spiritual. I mean, it's kind of what I turn my attention to all the time. But the truth is, like, I want things for myself. I want to have experiences. I want to feel good. I want to, like, this is my confession. There's no part of my orientation that's about other people or dissolving my identity or anything like that. And just, how do we overcome that? Or do we just let the karmas kind of play out, like you said?
Well, it's called bodhicitta, which is cultivating the connection with all beings. The bottom line is no one can be truly free until all beings are free, because there's only one of us. We're cells of one body. So if one cell has cancer, the body is still sick. So that's one way of seeing it. So as a practice to cultivate that kind of feeling of loving kindness and compassion for all beings, that's one way of not thinking about yourself all the time. It's a practice, but we have to practice thinking about other things, because we're always thinking about something. You can't stop thoughts necessarily, and nor do we necessarily want to. That's a whole other path. But what we want to do is purify our intentions and our motivation so that all our actions start to be centered around the unity of all beings, the oneness of all beings. So that's why we offer our practice to all beings, the fruits of our practice. We still get the fruits of our practice, but we share with all beings, because that's one way of short-circuiting that me. I'm doing this for me. I want to be happy. But see, what we call happiness mostly is pleasure, and what we call unhappiness is mostly pain. And that's not exactly the real happiness. Joy, real joy, is actually our true nature, they say. And we're always trying to avoid pain and hold on to pleasure. And we think that's the way to go. But that's not the way to go. You can't avoid pain, nor can you hold on to pleasure. So we have to get past that. And that pain and pleasure orbit around me, the sense of me, the separate, small sense of me. So yeah, even doing spiritual practice is essentially based around the ego, the personal will. You need to use your will to transcend the sense of separateness that appears to be separate. Actually, we're not, but because we are identified with our sense information and our minds, our thoughts, we feel separate from everybody else. But that's just the most superficial level of experience. So you do your practice, you practice letting go again and again, coming back again and again to whatever your object of awareness is. You try to cultivate some, also when you start doing practice, you see how hard it is to get over your own shit. And when you really begin to see how hard it is to get over your own shit, you look around and you see, here are these people around me who are not doing anything to help themselves. How hard must it be for them to get through the day without creating more and more sufferings for themselves? And that inspires compassion in you automatically, naturally. You don't have to force it. You just have to see what's going on in order to begin to feel that kind of caring for others. But if we really cared about ourselves, we wouldn't be pursuing pleasures that don't last, and we wouldn't be trying to push away suffering that's impossible to push away. If we really cared about ourselves the right way. But most of us don't really yet. We still trying to avoid that and hold on to that. But the more we ripen through practice, the more we see through that particular mode of behavior. And eventually we get over it, I think. But you still have to, you're still kind of, you have to sit your ass down and do your stuff. No question about it. You don't do it. You don't plant the seeds of the things that we really want. Nothing can grow. Because we're planting seeds every moment. Every thought is a seed. So, in the course of a day, what seeds have we planted, So we begin to see that most of the time we're planting more seeds of me, and very few seeds of reality. So, the more you notice it, though, if you don't notice it, you can't do anything about it. So the more you notice it, the more you can do something about it. Purify the intentions, the aspiration. And Maharajji was just one, we asked him, how do you find God? He said, serve people. What? We weren't ready for that. What? Serve people? What are you talking about? What about Ram, Ram, Ram? What about, chanting? What about meditation? Nay. Well, how do you raise Kundalini? Feed people. Love everyone, serve everyone, and do a few Ram Rams. That's what he basically said. But he never encouraged us to do practice for the sake of our own spiritual blah, blah, blah. He didn't. So, but we do. Anyhow.
Thanks, KD, and thank you for your question, Clemence. And again, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. We have
That
a few.
was perfect. Thank you.
Oh, good. Thank you, Katie. I'm gonna ask you to do something, if you would, and I'll seed this just with a personal recollection. In 1972, I joined the Ananda Margam Yoga Society.
Oh, really? Wow.
You were probably familiar, and I'm not here to talk about me or that group, but we learned a number of chants. But we learned one chant in particular that it's 52 years later, and I still remember it. And if I sing it to myself, it's calming, it's healing, it's centering, it's grounding, and all of that. I was wondering if you could, and this is kind of, we're ad-libbing here a little bit, but if you could teach us something simple like that we could all take away, a simple short chant that we could sing not together because it doesn't work on Zoom so well, but that we might take away and just have as a practice throughout our day as we choose. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, that's all I do. Sing very simple.
Yeah.
Mostly they're not really long mantras like what I chanted before. But mostly I sing Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram, Sita Ram, Sita Ram. Maharaji said to us many times, through the repetition of these names, everything is accomplished. That's what he said to us. So perhaps we're not going to accomplish a hell of a lot, but whatever it is we're going to accomplish, he was very clear that we can accomplish by the repetition of what they call in India these sacred names, which is the names of these beings who essentially reside within us. They're a part of our true nature. So what the chants that I do, including Hare Krishna, this is a very simple chant. It does have a bit of a bad reputation, but it's still done all over. It's a wonderful chant. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. It's a very powerful chant, very beautiful. You don't have to join any group and sign your life away to sing it. None of these chants that I do involve any formal initiation. Maharaji didn't initiate people. He didn't give lectures. He didn't write books because it wasn't necessary.
Mm-hmm.
These names are the names of our own true being. So through the repetition of these names, these mantras, we move more deeply into ourself, our true self. So Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram is a very nice one.
Mm-hmm.
And you can merge it with your breath. As your breath comes in and goes out, you just repeat the mantra mentally. You can move your lips. That helps you pay attention. You can sing it out loud or chant it out loud because that also helps you pay attention. But just, Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram. And don't think that you have to know what it means.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't mean anything other than our own true being. Anything you think it means isn't what it means. Any storyline about, even Kabir, the great Saint Kabir said, that my Ram is not that prince, because there was the story of the Ramayana is one of the Indian legends. Ram and Krishna and all that, they all come part of the Indian mythology. But the real Ram lives within us. The real Krishna, the real Durga lives within. So when we repeat these names, we are moving more deeply into our true self, into our own actual being. Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram, Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram. Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram, Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram.
Yeah.
And Maharaji was always, his tongue was always moving. He was always repeating Ram, 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 Ram. There was nothing in there anymore except Ram. He got up, he walked around, miracles happened, he ate, he pooped, he pissed, but Ram was all that was happening. 24/7, 365.
Mm.
Nothing but Ram, nothing but love, nothing but truth, nothing but pure being. And that's who we are, but we don't know it.
Would you feel like singing one more time, and then maybe we can take another question or two before we close?
You said there were a lot of questions. Why don't we do those?
You'd rather do that? Okay, that's fine.
You want to hear me sing? It's better on the CDs or Spotify, especially today without my things going on here.
Well, if it does make you feel like a commodity, I will turn you on this afternoon on my Sonos here at the house. Adrian, you have your hand up. Thanks for being patient.
Hi. Hi, Katie. How are you?
Okay.
Okay.
Good to
I
see you.
would, good to see you too. I would really love for you to share with me one of your favorite memories you have with Ramdas.
Okay, you're breaking up a little bit. Please say it again.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's just I'm really deaf. Hold on, let me turn it up a
Oh,
little.
Well, it's a little muffled, Adrian. So if you can
oh, okay.
really enunciate.
Sorry. Can you
Go
hear me
ahead.
now? Okay. I would really love for you to share with me one of your favorite moments, memories you had with Ramdas.
With Ramdas?
Yes.
Ah.
Yeah.
I got 50 years of moments with Ramdas,
Yeah, I know you knew him for his whole life, and I just want one of
Yeah.
your memories you had with him.
One of my favorite moments was after he was living in Maui, after the stroke, when I would go out there, we'd have breakfast together, and then everybody else would leave the table, and it was just the two of us would sit there sometimes for hours and hours, and we'd just talk. And so one day we'd been talking for like 3 hours, with long silences in the middle. And then I said to him, I recorded this today. And he went, oh. And I said, what should I call it? So he was quiet for a minute, and he said, call it Dick and Jeff's Journey to Soul Land.
That's pretty funny.
Another favorite moment I had was after he left the body.
Yeah.
I finally went back to the house about a year later, and I went up to his room, and I was alone in the room. And I was sitting in the chair next to his chair where we used to sit for hours and hours and hours without speaking, just silently being together. And I was sitting there with my eyes closed, and I thought, fuck, he's more here right now than he was then. I felt him so strongly. It was really amazing. And I realized that all those years of us sitting together, we were developing this open communication, this open channel, and that it was still open.
There.
It was still open, totally present. Really beautiful moment. He was quite an extraordinary being. It's hard for us Westerners to kind of respect other Westerners. We're very judgmental, we think that, maybe not so much now as some years ago, but we think that, all the holy people are over there. But Ramdas really, really became immersed, really dissolved into love.
Yeah, the loving awareness.
Yeah. By the end of that 20 plus years in the wheelchair, he really, there was no escape for him. We sit for 5 minutes or 20 minutes or an hour or 2 hours and we think we're hot shit, but he had no escape. He was in that chair. He was in pain all the time. He never complained. There was nowhere he could go get away from it except within. And he really went in there. It goes back to the time with Maharajji. One time, Maharajji had said to Ramdas, you're a saint. You shouldn't touch money. So Ramdas gave his money to this guy to be his bag man, like buy him tickets on the bus and buy him food and stuff like that. So one day, Ramdas wakes up and all the Westerners had gone to the temple already, and he was alone in the town, and he didn't have money to buy a ticket on the bus. So he had to walk to the temple over the mountains. It's about a 4-hour walk
Oh wow.
through the jungle, up and down, you know. And the whole time he was fuming. He was raging. And he walks into the temple and he's just like furious. And the guy he hated the most in the group, in the Westerners, stood up. We were on the other side of the courtyard and Maharajji was having us fed. So this guy stands up and he offers Ram Dass a plate of food. And right there in the courtyard in front of Maharajji, Ram Dass takes the food and he throws it in the guy's face.
Oh my gosh.
And Maharajji sees it and he goes, Ram Dass, something wrong? So come here. And Ram Dass goes there. Maharajji says, what's the matter? And Ram Dass said, I can't stand impurities in myself or in other people. So Maharajji looks at Ram Dass. He said, Ram Dass, love everyone and tell the truth. So Ram Dass says, the truth is, I don't love everyone. Maharajji looks at him and says, Ram Dass, love everyone and tell the truth. And I tell you, by the end of his life, he loved everyone, and it was the truth. He really dissolved his shit into love, and a very rare being, really special being. Yeah.
Oh wow. Thank you so much for sharing with
You're
me.
welcome.
I
Thanks.
would love, yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks for your question, Adrian. Thanks for your patience too. We're going to try to use the rest of our time well here. Jeremy, you've patiently had your hand up for a while. If you'd like to, if you have a short question, maybe we can get both you and Bianca in before we have to go.
Okay, great. Well, it's good to be here with you, Katie. I I was on Blue Spirits week 1, and we're
Oh,
just
I'm
happy.
sorry I couldn't make it.
That's totally okay. It was a magical, wonderful week, and it was, of course, all perfect. And it's interesting because, you know, as these things go, the main essences of my questions have kind of already been asked, and a lot of it has been around selfishness and kind of judgment and projection upon others, which you just touched upon with the story with Ram Dass. So I guess for me, you know, I'm a musician as well, and I'm on this journey of pivoting more toward music of devotion, music of service. I'm also in this time period where I'm really just taking a look at all the music I've created over the last 20 years and how much of it was selfish disguised as service. It's been a brutal truth for me. And Maharajji I only met him once, and it was in a dream. And in the dream, he was very clearly giving me this message. He was asking me to actually sacrifice my beloved instrument in the dream. And I think it took me many years to realize this message of, you know, if you're doing it for yourself, what's the point? So I guess my question is, what advice would you give to me or someone who's on this path of pivoting and finding that, you know, music is service and kind of getting out of one's own way, and perhaps maybe touching upon cultivating a relationship with Maharajji, having never met him in the flesh, and getting past his antics that I can feel that are really kind of pushing and prodding at me, and developing more of a loving connection.
Well, chanting is the practice of the repetition of the name with music. You know, when a baby needs to take medicine, or a child takes medicine, many times it's hidden in a sweet syrup, so they take it. And that's the case here. The music is the syrup, and the medicine is the name, is the mantra. Music isn't enough in itself. If it was enough, every musician would be happy. And that's exactly, it's the opposite. And in fact, many musicians, and I would say most musicians, they have a hard time with life because they can so easily escape into the world of music. Their relationships are fucked. Their daily life is not a lot of fun because they're good at avoiding, because when things get tough, they just go to music land, which they can do. So can music itself be a path? It could be, but you'd have to add a lot of awareness to the practice, and it's very difficult because of the pleasure of making music. You lose your awareness in the pleasure. So I would say, I wouldn't say give up music, but I would say maybe do some chanting with music as a practice, not for anybody else other than yourself. And then when you're doing that practice with the mantra and you're singing, making some music with it, you're paying attention to the sound of the mantra. You're not getting lost in the beauty of the music or even the making of the music. Your awareness is on the sound of the mantra. So if you start doing that, you might be able to separate yourself. You might be able to notice more the difference between paying attention to this and getting lost in the creative process, in the enjoyment process, in the communication. Chanting is not communication. I don't know who's in the room. I don't care who's in the room. I'm not singing to the people in the room. I'm singing to, you could say, my own heart, or I would just say Maharajji, because he's in the room. That's who I'm singing to. So when you chant, you want to develop a connection with him, then remember him and sing to him. And that way you can transform what you're doing into some kind of trying to connect to a deeper place. But the most important thing is your intention, your motivation. So if you want to connect with a deeper place, you'll aim for that and you'll look for ways to do that. If you want to make money, and get famous and party, you can do that too. But it's not the same thing. But yeah. And Maharajji said, whoever remembers me, if you look at my picture, I'm there. Because he's everywhere. It's not like, I remember when the 17th Karmapa came to America for the first time. I was in an auditorium with him in the audience. And somebody asked him if that question about connecting with him. He said, we're always connected. He said, but am I aware of you every moment? Your little bubble? No, but we are connected on a deeper level. So it's a question of getting to that level. And the only one way to do that is with practice of one kind or another. And if your music is a way of remembering him, then it will be. If it isn't, it won't be. Only you know. And him, he knows too.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks for a great question. And we just have a little bit of time, Blanca. If you have a short question or comment,
I'll give a quick answer.
Yeah,
Not more than 10 minutes.
Well, I'm trying to watch your time here too. I
don't
can.
care. I'm all right.
Blanca, go
I'm
ahead.
already
Yeah.
up. Yeah, can't hear you.
You'll have to unmute. Oops, not yet. Not yet.
Can you hear me now?
Now we
Yeah.
have you. Yes.
It's such a pleasure to talk to you again, KD. It's such a wonderful thing that Maharaji gathers all of us. He plays around me using your form. I dream about you ever since I was 6. So I
That's
think,
you. I was wondering who that was.
yes, I
No.
dream. Yes, you appear in my dreams, and I think it's him in a way to connect with the chanting, and it's amazing. So I was wondering if you just said that those great beings they use different ways to bring us to the presence, but do you know if there are beings like Maharaji in full form walking on earth right now? You have to know something about that, you know.
They're always here. We're the ones who aren't here.
Where are they? This world is so
They-
crazy, you know.
No, we don't find them. They find us when they want to see us, when it's right for them, and when it's right for us. We're not running the show. We think we are, but we're not. We don't manifest them. They show up in our lives, one way or another. Maybe not physically. It's not important to them physical. If you think of them, they're there. If you connect with them, it's real. But to sit around and wait for a physical being to show up at your door before you start practicing or doing anything to help yourself is not a good idea. Not a good idea. Because these beings, all these great beings, they know what we need in order to progress on the path. And if it's what we need and in our karmas for them to manifest in our lives physically, it'll happen. If not, if it's not in our own best interest, it's not going to happen. So there's no sense waiting around. You know, the real form to worship is if you look in the mirror, that's the form right there. If you can see that divine in yourself, that love that lives within you as who you really are, then you're in good shape. But most of us just see the pimple on our cheek, or, you know, our eyes are all puffy or something. That's what we see when we look in the mirror. We don't see the love. So if we could see the love, we'd be in good shape. So there's no sense running around looking for them. It doesn't work that way.
Thank you so much. I love you very much.
I mean, when there's a great book called By His Grace, written by an old devotee named Dada Mukherjee. First time Dada met Maharaji, Maharaji takes his hand and starts walking out of the house that they were in towards Dada's house and said, "From now on, I'll be living with you." The first, you know, now imagine you come out of a Stop and Shop or a 7-Eleven, and as you're getting into the car, some homeless guy gets into the car next to you and into the seat next to you and says, "From now on, I'll be living with you." I don't think so. So there you go. That's the difference between them and us. You know, so we have to just be who we are and start from there. And there's no getting around that.